The morning air was thick with silence, the kind that only exists in the pause before something breaks. Dew still clung to the petals of my father's white roses, his pride, his joy, the same ones he'd planted when I got engaged, as if he believed in beginnings more than endings. I was crouched near the trellis, pruning shears in hand, when I heard them, heels. For sharp clicks on the stone path, crisp and deliberate. Designer shoes. Louboutin, if I had to guess. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. No one but Vanessa would dare stomp through my father's garden like it belonged to her. Still playing house in the dirt, Elara? Her voice was dipped in that fake sweetness she wore like perfume. Thick, suffocating. I didn't flinch. I simply trimmed another blossom from the bush. Good morning, Vanessa. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across the flower bed. The scent of her perfume, overpowering, expensive, invasive, fought against the gentle fragrance of roses. You know why I'm here, she said smoothly. The reading of the will is tomorrow. Jasper, and I think it's best if we settle things civilly. I stood slowly, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. The soil had crept under my nails, the same way grief had crept under my skin these past 2 weeks. There's nothing to settle, I replied evenly. This is my father's house, his estate, and you were part of his family, she cut in, lips painted a venomous red. Jasper was like a son to Richard. For 15 years. That counts for something. I felt the pruning shears in my hand grow heavier, as if absorbing the weight of her words. You mean the same Jasper who cheated on his daughter with his secretary? I asked, voice low but firm. Vanessa's smile didn't waver. Ancient history. Your father forgave him. They still played golf every Sunday, well, until you know. I did know. I knew too well. My father's death was still a wound so fresh I couldn't breathe without bleeding. And yet here she was, circling like a vulture. He wouldn't have left anything to Jasper, I said. He wasn't stupid. Her smile cracked just slightly. We'll see about that. Your brother, Theo, seems to think differently. My breath caught. You've spoken to Theo? I asked quietly. Vanessa stepped even closer, her voice slipping into a whisper like a blade. Oh, sweetheart, we've done more than talk. He's been very helpful. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My hands tightened around the shears, knuckles white. In my mind, I heard my father's voice, low, steady, patient. The roses need a firm hand, Elara, but never a cruel one. Even thorns have purpose. Get off my property, I said, quiet but sharp, before I forget my manners. She laughed, not the laugh of someone amused, but the laugh of someone who thought they'd already won. This house is worth millions. Did you really think you'd get to keep it all to yourself? Playing gardener in your daddy's mansion while the rest of us... She turned and strutted back toward the gate, her heels stabbing into the path like accusations. Dust rose in her wake. I looked down at the rose in my hand, crushed, soil-stained, trembling. My father once told me white roses meant new beginnings, but all I could see was red. The silence after Vanessa left wasn't peace, it was a vacuum, one that pulled every thought into a single point of gravity. Theo. I hadn't spoken to my brother since the funeral, since he'd stood beside Jasper like some loyal usher instead of mourning our father. The betrayal hadn't fully landed back then. Now it hit like a truck. I walked back into the house, no, my house, and stood beneath the vaulted ceilings my father had once painted himself. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person I knew would understand. Celine, it's me. She came. Vanessa. She said things about Theo. I need you here. I'm already in the car, she replied without hesitation. Hang tight. She arrived 30 minutes later, briefcase in one hand, bottle of wine in the other. That was Celine. Logic in one palm, comfort in the other. I figured we might need both, she said, offering me a tight smile. You look like hell. I feel worse, I admitted. We sat in my father's study, the heavy scent of aged leather and paper lingering in the air like his presence. Celine placed the wine aside and reached into her case. "Your father left instructions for me," she said, "to be opened only if certain conditions were met. Looks like they have been." She handed me an envelope, thick, heavy, sealed with a red wax stamp pressed with the Lancaster family crest, a hawk above a blooming rose. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, a single handwritten note, and a small brass key. "My dear Celera, if you're reading this, then someone has already made a move on the estate. Knowing human nature, as I do, I'm guessing it's Vanessa. She was always predictable in that way." I blinked, the ink seeming to pulse with his voice in my head. His tone wasn't angry. It was calm, prepared. He knew. He'd always known. The key trembled in my fingers. "What does this open?" Celine stood and crossed to his desk. With practiced hands, she slid open the bottom drawer and inserted the key. A soft click, like the unlocking of a vault. Inside, a thick manila envelope, a black USB drive, a second, smaller envelope with my name handwritten across it. Celine placed it all before me. "Before you open that," she said, "there's something you should know." I looked up, eyes wide. "Your father modified his will," she said, 3 days before he died." "What kind of modification?" "A codicil, legally binding, and very specific." The envelope's flap peeled back with a whisper. I pulled out the documents, photographs, statements, signatures. I didn't need to read them all to understand. This wasn't a warning. This was a war plan. The envelope was a storm disguised in paper. I spread its contents across the desk: bank statements, wire transfers, notarized affidavits, and photos. Photos of Jasper and Vanessa meeting with someone in the shadows of a parking garage. The next image made my stomach tighten. Theo, standing beside them, expression hard to read. In the second frame, he was walking away, a check clutched in his hand. My heart dropped. "He took the bribe," I whispered. "No," Celine said, calm and steady. "He took it to your father. That's when everything changed." I stared at her. "You're telling me Theo helped him?" "Yes. He's been playing a dangerous game, feeding Vanessa and Jasper just enough to keep them confident, while helping your father build the case." I didn't know what hit me harder, relief or guilt. Then, as if summoned by the weight of the truth, there was a knock on the study door. Theo stepped in. Gone was the polished, distant brother from the funeral. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Elara," he said softly, his voice cracking. "I came to make this right." I didn't speak, just watched as he crossed the room and placed a check on the desk. $500,000, he said. "That's what Vanessa offered me, in exchange for testifying that Dad wasn't of sound mind when he changed the will." I looked at the check. Crisp, uncashed. "You didn't take it?" "I took it straight to Dad," he replied, "and he told me we didn't have much time." His voice shook as he opened a folder and slid forward more documents. They weren't just trying to take the estate. They were planning to sell everything, liquidate the company, bulldoze the house, turn the garden into condos. My hands clenched. I could still smell the roses outside, still see the white petals I'd crushed in my palm. "They said I could go back to my apartment," I murmured, "that I didn't deserve any of this." Theo nodded grimly, and they believed it, until Dad turned the tables. He handed me a final sheet, proof of embezzlement. Vanessa had started siphoning money from Lancaster Industries 6 months before my divorce. Dad found out just before his diagnosis, Theo said. He didn't confront her, not directly. He started documenting. Quietly, strategically. He knew the cancer would move faster than the courts. So he laid a trap. Theo met my eyes. "The moment they accept any part of the inheritance," he said, "they trigger a clause. Every piece of evidence, photos, video, financial trails, goes public. Criminal. Irrefutable. The pieces click together like a locked vault. My father hadn't just tried to protect his estate. He'd planned an ambush, and we were standing in the war room. The next morning, the house felt different. The air buzzed with tension, the kind that gathers before thunder breaks. In the study, Celine arranged papers across my father's massive oak desk with the precision of someone loading ammunition, not legal documents. Outside the study window, I could see Vanessa on the front lawn, surrounded by a small camera crew. She rehearsed her acceptance speech like she was receiving a humanitarian award, not someone about to stake claim to a legacy she tried to steal. She really brought a crew. Theo muttered, slipping through the door. Let her, Celine said. She's about to give the performance of her life for the wrong audience. I stood near the window, fingers tracing the edge of a leather-bound folder. Is everything ready? Celine tapped her briefcase. The codicil. Copies of every document. The USB. Once they accept the terms, it all becomes active. A commotion echoed from the hallway. They're here, Theo said. And just like that, it began. Vanessa swept into the room with Jasper beside her, dressed like they were attending a gala instead of a reckoning. She wore white, of course she did. Purity in fabric. Poison beneath. I'm so glad we could all be civil, she chirped, settling into a chair like she already owned it. Let's begin. Celine stepped forward. As the legal executor of Richard Lancaster's estate, I will now read his last will and testament, as well as any amendments filed before his passing. Her voice was calm, measured, immovable. The initial will was straightforward. Lancaster Manor, company shares, liquid assets, 60% to me, 40% to Jasper and Vanessa, jointly. Vanessa gasped, actually gasped. I knew he loved us like family, she whispered, clutching Jasper's arm. This is everything we hoped for. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned in. And then silence. Celine placed a second envelope on the desk. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment before she broke the seal. There was an additional document filed 3 days before Mr. Lancaster's death. A codicil. Vanessa blinked. A what? A legal modification, Celine clarified, already unfolding the pages. Triggered only once the primary terms are accepted. Vanessa's smile faltered. Accepted. Jasper looked confused. We accepted by showing up. No, Celine said gently. You accepted by confirming your intent to claim the inheritance. On camera. Publicly. She slid a folder across the desk. Perhaps these will explain. Inside, photos of Vanessa handing a check to Theo. Screenshots of emails between her and a private investigator targeting my father's assets. Financial statements showing thousands siphoned from the company into offshore accounts. And the USB ready to go viral. Jasper grabbed a photo, his face going pale. Where did you get these? From Richard, Theo said, voice cold. He collected everything. He knew exactly what you were planning. Celine didn't flinch. According to the codicil, any attempt to fraudulently claim from the estate triggers the release of all this evidence to federal authorities. Vanessa's hands trembled. You trapped us. I stepped forward. No, I said. You trapped yourselves. The room fell deathly still. Even the cameras stopped clicking, as if unsure whether they were filming justice or tragedy. You lied. You schemed. You tried to erase the man who built this legacy, and you underestimated him, just like you underestimated me. Vanessa stood, mascara already streaking. This isn't over. Actually, Celine said, folding the codicil back into its envelope, it is. From the hallway, footsteps approached, firm, deliberate. The police, Theo said simply. Vanessa spun just as 2 officers entered. One read her rights. The other clasped her wrists. Jasper didn't resist. He simply slumped back in his chair like the air had been punched from his lungs. And I stood still, watching them disappear down the hallway, like ghosts finally being exorcised. The trap had been sprung, and every piece of it, every line, every clause, every consequence, had been written not in vengeance, but in love. My father hadn't just protected me from betrayal. He'd made sure the world would see it too. The house emptied slowly, as if exhaling the poison it had held too long. But justice, I was learning, didn't come quietly, it echoed. By evening, news trucks lined the road outside the estate. Headlines scrolled across every screen. Heiress exposes high society fraud ring. Wife of former CEO arrested in multi-million-dollar scheme. And beneath those headlines was her face. Vanessa, real name, Margaret Phillips. Celine was the one who found it first. She burst into the study, phone in hand, eyes blazing with disbelief. Ilara, the district attorney, just called. They've confirmed it. Vanessa, Margaret, has been operating under multiple identities across 3 states. She's wanted for similar schemes in New York, Colorado, and Arizona. I froze mid-step. She what? Celine opened a folder the FBI had just delivered. Inside were documents, birth certificates, marriage licenses, job applications, all with different names. Same face, same game. She would infiltrate families through employment or relationships, Celine explained. Then isolate, manipulate, and destroy from the inside out. I stared at the photos. Vanessa as a secretary, a financial advisor, even a nanny. She specifically targeted Jasper, I murmured. None of it was coincidence. No, Theo said grimly, stepping into the room. It was strategic. He handed me a weathered leather journal. We found this in Dad's safe. It's disturbing. I opened it to a page marked with my father's handwriting. Paper brittle, ink careful. The Harrison family presents the perfect opportunity. Wealthy patriarch. Estranged children. Naive daughter who trusts too easily. My breath caught. Theo kept reading aloud. The husband is the weak link, easily manipulated through flattery and attention. Phase 1, destroy the marriage. Phase 2, separate the daughter from her allies. Phase 3, gain the father's trust and estate. I slammed the journal shut. She wrote this? She documented it. Yes, Celine answered, like some kind of instruction manual. She'd been using similar tactics for years, but this was the most ambitious, the most dangerous. She would have killed me, I said flatly. No one spoke, but the silence said it all. Theo's jaw clenched. She never would have gotten the chance. Celine nodded. And now, with the evidence your father left, her journal, the videos, the embezzlement trail, she's not just looking at fraud charges. We're talking attempted homicide, racketeering, conspiracy across state lines. There was a heaviness in the room. Not fear, truth. The kind that presses against the ribs and forces the heart to recalibrate. My father had seen it all, tracked every move, understood her nature the moment she smiled too widely, stood too close, called him Richard instead of Mr. Lancaster. And he didn't just prepare the paperwork. He built a legacy out of foresight. This is bigger than us, Theo said quietly. And he knew that. Celine looked between us. The FBI wants to talk to you tomorrow. With the journal and your father's recordings, we can dismantle her entire network. I nodded slowly, fingers brushing over the leather journal. This wasn't just about protecting an estate. This was about ending something that had destroyed lives. And my father had already made the first move. The courthouse stood like a monolith, gray stone, cold glass, all sharp edges and silence. But inside it pulsed with tension. Cameras lined the hallway. Journalists whispered behind their notepads. And it was about to take the stand. Celine touched my shoulder gently. You don't have to speak today, she whispered. The evidence speaks for itself. I know, I said, but so did Dad. and he taught me to never let fear finish my sentence for me. The courtroom doors opened. Vanessa was already seated at the defense table, no longer in white. She wore a prison gray suit now, but the hatred in her eyes burned the same. Theo sat behind me in the gallery, still as stone. The judge entered. The room rose, and then the questioning began. Please state your name for the record. Elara Lancaster. And your relationship to the defendants. I looked directly at her. Jasper was my husband for 15 years. Vanessa, real name Margaret Phillips, was his secretary and the woman he had an affair with. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. And after your divorce? They married 6 months later. Then they began visiting my father, building trust, manipulating him, planning. And what were they planning, Ms. Lancaster? I inhaled, deep, steady, to isolate me, discredit me, gain control of my father's company, estate, and home, and eventually remove me. Objection, her lawyer shouted. Speculation. Celine stood. Your Honor, we have detailed plans recovered from the defendant's personal journal. Plans involving physical harm if financial control was delayed. The judge adjusted his glasses. Overruled. Please continue, the prosecutor said. My father suspected something early on, I said. That's why he hired private investigators. Why he started documenting everything. Why he changed his will. The next question came slow, intentional, and the day of the will reading, did the defendants accept the inheritance? They did, publicly, on camera. And what happened then? I turned slightly, just enough to see Vanessa's face. My father's final amendment triggered. Every piece of evidence, embezzlement, bribery, identity fraud, conspiracy, was released to the authorities. It was all planned. The prosecutor paused, letting it land. Was your father a vengeful man? No, I said, my voice soft. He was a just man, and he believed in letting the truth do the punishing. Vanessa shot to her feet. This is character assassination. None of this proves intent, the judge's gavel slammed. Sit down. But it was too late. Every word she just shouted was now part of the official court record. Theo caught my eye, gave me a small nod. The damage was done. During recess, Celine pulled me into the hallway. With that outburst and the evidence tied to her aliases, the DA is upgrading the charges. We're looking at 25 to 30 years minimum. And Jasper? I asked. He's cooperating, she said, but even then 10 to 15 easily. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, as if something had finally been washed away. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps shouting questions, but Celine raised a hand. My client has no comment, except to say that justice has been served, not just for her father, but for every family this woman ever tried to destroy. Back at the house, the silence was different. No longer heavy with grief, no longer tight with fear. It was open, like space waiting to be filled. Theo was waiting in the study when I returned. The curtains were drawn back, sunlight warming the hardwood floor where our father used to stand. They finished processing the room, he said. FBI cleared everything, but they left something for you. He handed me a small velvet box, inside a single key, and beneath it a folded note, for when justice blooms. I stared at the words, then at the key, delicate, ornate, slightly rusted. Not to the house, not to a safe. Theo nodded toward the window. Check the greenhouse. The old greenhouse stood at the edge of the garden, half hidden by overgrown lavender. The glass was streaked, but intact. I pushed open the door. Inside, a sealed envelope on the workbench. My name in my father's handwriting. My dearest Elara, by now, justice has been served, and the truth has come to light. But justice wasn't the only thing I wanted to cultivate in this greenhouse. I grew more than roses here. I grew hope. Hope that you would find your strength again, that you would bloom, despite the shadows others tried to cast over you. I blinked hard, kept reading. The deed enclosed is for the vacant lot next to your old flower shop. I bought it the day after I confronted Margaret. The business name is yours. Lancaster Gardens. Registered. Funded. Approved. Behind me, Celine stepped through the doorway, her tablet in hand. He really did it, she said, tapping the screen. Trademark. Permits. Initial capital. Everything's in place. All it needs now, Theo added, is you. I looked around the greenhouse. The faded tools. The cracked ceramic pots. The life that had once thrived here and the new life waiting just outside. You're not doing this alone, Celine said gently. We're in this with you. Every step. Theo smiled. Someone has to keep the orchids alive. A knock came at the front of the house. Celine opened the door. It was the detective. He looked pleased. 3 more families just came forward, he said. Victims of Margaret's earlier schemes. With your father's journal and testimony, we've got everything we need to bring down her entire operation. I nodded slowly. My father had known this would happen. He hadn't just planted evidence. He'd planted a future. The next day, I stood in front of a sea of microphones, reporters pressing forward. I cleared my throat, no longer shaky. My name is Alara Lancaster. I am the daughter of Richard Lancaster. I speak not just for my family, but for every family that's ever been targeted by manipulation disguised as affection. This is not just a victory. It's a beginning. Flashes, applause, headlines forming even as I stepped back. Later, in the quiet of the greenhouse, Celine handed me a fresh legal pad. So, shall I start drawing up the launch paperwork for Lancaster Gardens? I looked through the glass, where my father's white roses still bloomed. Resilient, defiant, glorious. Yes, I said, and for the first time in years I truly meant it.